Wings by Channeling This Was My Design. The Adventure Zone fanfic. Chapter 1. Taako chose to hang back and glare at the edge of the moon base when the others carried on regardless, dropping out of the sky down to Lucas's lab, ready to fight. The last time he kept pace with Magnus as they approached an obstacle. The ridiculous man had thrown him over his shoulder and carried him. He would not be allowing that affront to his dignity ever again. Magnus might have been heavy, but his bronze feathered wings were huge and could easily carry the extra weight. Even Merle sported a pair of his own, speckled gray and messy, but perfectly functional. Taako didn't like to admit that he'd never fledged. Almost everyone he knew had found their soulmate. Even people who were absolute scum of the earth. While they lived happy lives together, he was alone. He felt the absence keenly, but the pull that was meant to draw him to his soulmate had never led him anywhere. He was used to it. He didn't care anymore. Taako flared the Umbra staff, turning to wink at the director before allowing himself to fall backwards over the edge of the base. The Umbra staff gave him the perfect excuse not to present functional wings, making it look like a fashion decision rather than the sorry situation he was actually in. After all, it would look weird if he didn't fly down on his own steam. In this world, what sort of self-respecting wizard needed to waste a spell slot to feather fall? Wings don't manifest immediately. Some people would wake with their wings the morning after meeting their soulmate for the first time, with absolutely no idea which people they met that day before they fulfilled their role. Usually, people would just retrace their steps, visiting all the same locations they had the day before, until they ran into someone who was doing the same thing. Their new wings were obvious because they could not be retracted until they met their soulmate again. That was simple. It was foolproof. It was completely impossible for Taako. "What the fuck?" he muttered under his breath as he stared at himself in the mirror. His wings were midnight blue and shone with flecks of silver, almost perfectly mimicking the stars of the night sky. They were sleek and glossy, twice his height when folded, and completely unexpected. How could he have fledged? He tried to think back on the day before, to retrace his steps in his mind. It had been candle nights, and he had met so many people from the base before the incident with Lucas's lab. None of them had caught his attention. Not even for a moment. It would be just his luck, he supposed, if his soulmate had been Lucas. The geeky mad scientist definitely wasn't his type, but people often said that about their soulmates until they got to know them. What if it was some randomier from the base, some nobody? Taako wasn't a nobody kind of guy. At least, he was a wizard. He could cast illusions over his wings to hide them. He'd be able to get on with things as usual. No one would need to know that he had no soulmate before yesterday. No one would need to know he'd kind of found them. When he met them again, it would be obvious anyways, because he'd be able to get rid of the blasted things. The Grim Reaper didn't sleep. He was in the middle of catching a bounty when it happened. He dodged out of the way of a particularly nasty ray of frost. Definitely a crit 20. Only to have a freezing pain strike the new extensions on his shoulder blade. His scythe tore through the air, ripping the soul from the necromancer's body and creating a portal all in one sweep. Screaming and thrashing, the necromancer fell into the eternal stockade. The portal closed with a snap behind him. He folded the pair of raven wings around himself, frozen in shock. How could this be possible? He was dead. He couldn't have a soulmate. That wasn't how it worked. But he had wings now, and they were irrefutable proof that was exactly how it worked. Who had he met in the last 24 hours? It had been a bizarre day, but not a busy one. The necromancer he just dispatched to the stockade wasn't his soulmate. Otherwise, he would have been able to make the wings disappear. There were 4 other bounties he tried to collect the day before. 3 of them had wings. The other had made rather explicit threats regarding tentacles. He hadn't met anyone else, not a soul. Taako, dead more times than any self-respecting elf should have died, and still full of life. What an unlucky man. After all, who would want to be paired with the Grim Reaper? Wings that he couldn't control would be a huge problem. Whether the elf liked it or not, they would have to meet again. At least once more. Kravitz raised his scythe, hesitated, and cast Disguise Self over his wings. Glad for his expanding spell list as a Reaper. He might be an unwelcome soulmate, but he didn't have to rub it into the elf's face. The scythe tore through reality. The tear in reality showing the elf in front of a mirror, wings arched tightly behind him. They were the most beautiful wings he had ever seen. "Hey, Skeletor!" Taako sounded exhausted. Though his wings were held elegantly behind him, his shoulders were slumped. "Think you could come back later? You can't kill me now. I'm busy." Kravitz had to admit, he expected a worse reaction. The elf didn't even have the courtesy to look afraid. At least, not of him. There was a desperation in his eyes as he assessed his own wings. His finely manicured hands were shaking. "I didn't come here to kill you," he promised. Part of him, the sensible part, thought he should just step back through the portal and leave, but the remainder was still transfixed by those midnight wings. "That's good. Still, Ghost Rider, you think you could do this another time?" Kravitz should definitely just leave. Let Taako retract his wing, figure it out for himself when he was alone. The elf would know the truth, and be relieved that he didn't have to pretend to like the Grim Reaper or risk being killed. Soulmates weren't always nice. There were many documented cases of abusive soulmates deciding that if they couldn't have one of those wings fledged for themselves, no one could. With a soulmate like the Grim Reaper, of course Taako would be afraid of soulmate homicide. Kravitz would never dream of such a thing, but the elf wouldn't know that. "I'm canceling your bounty," he resolved aloud, instead dragging flesh over his bone so he looked as unthreatening as possible. Yeah, the elf flexed his wings, and in a moment they disappeared completely. For just a second, Kravitz waited with bated breath for him to realize what that meant. But it seemed he hadn't retracted the appendages. The illusion Taako cast was flawless. No one would ever guess that the wings were even there. He spun to Kravitz, expression coming to life. "Is that all you wanted to say? You know, I'm a busy elf. Lots to do. If you still needed to chat, I'll have to check my diary. How does the first of never sound?" "How about Tuesday?" Kravitz tensed, hardly believing he just asked that. Taako raised an eyebrow. "Is that your way of telling me when I'm going to die? Just so you know, Chaboy's not going out without a fight. This wouldn't be strictly for business?" He hedged reluctantly. He should definitely just quit while he was ahead. The astral plane offered a perfect place to retreat. He should just go. "A date with death," Taako grinned, no joy reaching his eyes. Cool. Still, unless you haven't noticed, Chaboy is taken." The wings re-emerged, fluffing out and rustling. Okay. Kravitz hardly believing how close he was in that moment to letting his own newly fledged wings be seen. But his concealing spell just held with an on-the-nose wisdom save. I should just go." He opened his hand, his scythe pulling itself together from the shadows and tearing a hole in reality. He had almost stepped through when a chilling touch grabbed his previously blasted wings. He failed his wisdom save. "Holy crap! Bird boy!" Taako yelped, his chill touch dispelling before it could do any damage. Kravitz desperately wanted to leap through the portal. Only the thought that the Grim Reaper could not be seen to run away held him in place. Taako was staring for a long time before he finally seemed to snap out of it. When he did, the first thing he did was retract his own wings. Taako gasped, reaching round behind him and spinning like a dog chasing its own tail as he tried to find the point where his wings had been attached. His long ears laid flat back against his skull, betraying fear. They're new? They are. Taako's breathing was heavy and echoing in the small room. Time seemed to drag on as they both remained frozen. I'm not yours. Taako's tone was defensive. From his fingers sparked with magic. I'm Taako. From TV? You don't get to claim me just because of some feathers. Kravitz recognized the archaic statement. It had been out of fashion even when he was alive. But even now, there were some people who seemed to find the idea romantic. Kravitz had lived too long and seen too much to think that being someone's soulmate meant you had any claim on them. I wouldn't dream of it, he assured the elf. Taako didn't look like he trusted Kravitz at all, but some of the vitriol in him seemed to fade slowly away, leaving him wringing his hands nervously. It broke Kravitz's heart to see him like that. He wasn't sure what he could say that would help. But he was an old romantic, so he pointed to his own wings. But from the moment these appeared, I belong to you. The silence lingered for a long moment. Taako doubled over laughing. Did you really just say that? Kravitz cringed, but would not back down. Whether Taako wanted it or not, whether it was cheesy or pathetic or stereotypical, he knew it to be the truth. The elf sauntered across to him, his confidence back. He reached a manicure out to run through the raven black feathers. So, Tuesday?